Today's guest on the podcast is Kim Troy, who's the CEO and founder of Civilis Consulting Group, which is a broad-based consulting group. But we're going to focus today very much on the area of recruitment and retention. And of course, the market and everybody in the marketplace, there's a big fight for talent, very hard to attract talent into the organization and very hard to retain the talent. So we spent a lot of time talking to Kim, and she's an expert in this space because she helps organizations do precisely that. Is what are the things that you need to have in place in order to be attractive as an organization to join? What are the things about the culture? What are the things about the values? What are the things about how people are going to be treated, how people are going to be onboarded? All of that hugely important, and how you're actually going to keep those people once you get them into the organization so they still feel valued and that their career is evolving and developing as they go through. So really, really fascinating conversation about culture and values. And also how people need to be, what is important for the hiring manager, how that hiring manager needs to turn up, and how they need to be also in a time where there are kind of multi-generations in the workforce, which is bringing its own challenges. And of course, with all the changes that are going on with COVID. Kim also has a very interesting background because she's had the corporate experience. She then went out and she worked for a number of wildlife organizations in the continent of Africa. And she talks about that and what she learned about that. And, she come back and said, okay, when you looked at it, that what she really learned in those areas, amongst the things she learned when working in Africa, was the ability to actually, find resources that were just, in many cases, just disappearing on them, but also how to bring that resilience back into organizations and help them thrive. So I really encourage you to sit back and listen to very, very interesting. I just found Kim to be a great person to interview. I find it so interesting to listen to her story and to listen to what she's learned. And I would highly recommend that you sit back and enjoy this interview with Kim Troy. Kim, thank you so much for joining us here today. It's a real pleasure to have you on the podcast.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for asking.
Listen, can I get straight into it? Because I know that your consulting firm, Civilis, it's fairly broad-based. I know one of the things that you do a lot is that you help organizations recruit talent. Now, in today's market, that must be pretty challenging because it's a pretty hot market.
Yeah.
And so where you see, the market that is, that the fight for talent is just so really, really intense.
Yeah.
What makes a company attractive to join, or what makes a company attractive to stay in?
Yeah. Yeah. So, now more than ever, I think what we're seeing is that society, everybody is thinking a lot differently about a company and about the role of an employer. For each of us. So I think we need to think differently as employers about what we what we say, and really we need to get crystal clear on who we are as a company. So one of the things that we do first and foremost with our clients is we help them really understand and articulate what their company culture is. And I know everyone thinks they have a culture, and they may, but whether it's well articulated and whether everyone in the company understands what that is sort of two different things. And so that's what we look at first.
Yeah. I think just on the thing of culture, I think every organization does have a culture, just some cultures aren't what they want it to be.
Right. Yes, exactly. Well, and I think that's the other thing too, is that, we have to have a place that's compelling enough to get people to want to leave their homes right now, to want to leave, to want to come to work and spend time with the people that are there at that workplace, as opposed to being at home with their kids, or perhaps doing more with less money. Those are the things that we're competing against now that we maybe have never had to compete with in the recent past. So we're really having to think about, okay, what is going to compel someone to want to be here and spend time in this environment, and spend a good portion of their day and of their life energy here. And everyone is as employees, we're all rethinking that. We're all rethinking our priorities and trying to really make sense of how we want to spend our life energy. So we have to make our companies, if we want to attract great people, we have to make our companies a compelling place to be. And that really does start with not, again, like we said, certainly with the culture and articulating the culture, but again, understanding what is special about that culture and why somebody would want to spend, 40, 50 hours a week at this workplace.
And do you find with clients that they find it easy to articulate their culture, and that they can, and also can they demonstrate to the interviewee that it's not just kind of placards on a wall, it's for real?
That's exactly it. No, it's hard to do that. I think that we go through exercises, pretty in-depth exercises with leadership teams and with company ownership or even board members to really start to distill that and understand that. But no, it's very difficult to do because it depends on the type of company. If you're talking about an entrepreneurial company that's been, founded by an individual, typically what happens is the culture kind of grows organically out of what it is that's important to that entrepreneur. So in that environment, they also have, well, of course they have difficulty. They have difficulty articulating that because you have to really dig deep and understand what are some of those underlying motivations. Why did this person start this company? What's important to this person, and what does this company mean to them? Those are all the things that ultimately make their way into the culture or the way that the company works and behaves. But until you really understand that psyche and dig in to that entrepreneur's, underlying motivation, you can't really articulate it. And you can't also, you have to be able to articulate it. They have to have some self-awareness about it. And sometimes, that's harder for some people than it is for others. So,
and when you're looking at what do you see? I know this is kind of a hard question because to answer, because I'm sure it can be different, but overall, what are the elements of a culture that are attractive to get the talent in?
Yeah. So, what I find is that it's typical. Well, first of all, it's got to be differentiated, meaning if you're saying the same thing, or if you're sort of putting out there that you're, it's whatever, it's about transparency, or it's about, fun. We love to have fun. If you're putting things out there that are what everybody else is going to hear and see, you're not really, it's not going to be attractive. It's just noise to the prospective employee. So what you have to really do is dig in to understand what it is that is unique about your particular way of doing your business. And then we amplify that as far as the way that we advertise and promote the company to a prospective employee. So it's different for different markets, different for different, industries. What I do find in general that sort of is across the board, though, is that our younger workforce tends to want to be developed. They want to see a career path. They want to see forward movement. So that is something that I find across the board, whether that's in, regardless of the industry, that the younger workforce wants to feel like they're going to be in a company that is going to develop them and give them skills and give them some sort of forward movement. So that's something that we also need to really be cognizant of as part of our culture and part of our leadership.
And apart from that, kind of okay, this organization, I look at this organization and see, here's an organization who's going to grow me, develop me. They're going to invest in me to, to improve my skills, my knowledge, my expertise.
Right.
What are the other parts of that you see that land that make it attractive to somebody to join?
Yeah. So, it's going to be, again, this authenticity, the ability to kind of put it out there and say who we are. Because what that will do is that will just naturally filter in the people that will be the right fit, the people that resonates with, and it will naturally filter out the people that don't. So, we've done with clients in the past, we've done it for ourselves in the past, where, we will, the way that we convey the organization will be as much about what you'll get when you work here and what you won't get when you work here, right? If this is the kind of place where these types of values and this kind of environment resonates with you, great. We're have always been a virtual company. We've always operated that way. And when we're in the past, but as well as now, when we're recruiting people, we talk about not just what the great things are about working in a remote type of environment, but we talk about upfront about, okay, if you are easily distracted, if you need other people around you to provide energy, this is not the place for you to be working. Mm-hmm. So I think it's just important that we really understand as an organization, what kind of person will thrive here and what kind of person won't. And let's not try to attract those people where they're not going to thrive. Let's just be authentic and upfront about that.
Yeah. And in terms of, you're talking about the culture, how important is it for particularly the people coming out of universities and that are in the early stages of their career? How important to them is that the organization is very clearly a purpose-driven organization?
Huge. I mean, huge, really? Right? I mean, everybody, this younger workforce, especially those just now entering the workforce, really, I mean, they're very cause-oriented. They're very mission-oriented. They really need to feel like what they're doing is going to make a difference, and not just for the organization. They need to feel like what they're doing, I don't mean make a difference by helping this company make more money. Feel, right?
That it does something for the community or
exactly. And we talk a lot about in our in the work that we do on the marketing. We do a lot of marketing work with clients, and we do a lot of culture building work with clients. And across the board, we talk a lot about impact, and we think of impact that we're having far beyond what we're impacting within our four walls or what we're impacting right here today or on the P&L. So we're thinking about impact in the way that we position the company, the way that we position our culture, the way that our employees interact and with each other and with their customers. We think about it in terms of, okay, how far reaching is the impact that we can have? And so we build, again, we help our client articulate their culture in terms of the impact that their organization has in the greater world. And that then, and it doesn't, you can do that in a lot of different ways. You don't have to be, a nonprofit or, in order to be able to think about it that way and really understand we're all connected. We can't help it these days.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So we all are having an impact. It's just, are we understanding what that impact is? And are we choosing to make sure that the way that we're doing it is having a positive impact? So.
Yeah. And so we talk about the organization, we talk about the person who's looking at the organization. But how does the hiring manager, because people join organizations, but they also join people, right?
Absolutely.
How does the hiring manager need to be in this environment? Because it's also, from what I'm seeing in the work that I do, one of the challenges is that, we've probably got 4 generations in the workforce. right? At the same
Mhm.
time. It's probably the first time in history we've had four
Yes.
generations at the same
Yes.
time. And there's big differences there between the generations in terms of
Yes.
expectation and experience. When I started working, you just got a job and you were grateful, right?
Yes.
And
Right. Not so
very
much
different,
now.
very different today, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
how do you need to coach, or what does the hiring manager, how they need to turn up in this environment?
Yeah, right. So I think one of the things that I think is important there is that everybody needs to understand what the qualities are that an individual has to have in order to be successful in your organization. And then what I'm seeing happen a lot right now with the hiring managers, especially if they're the ones that are ultimately making the decision about who reports to them, is that they're getting desperate, and they're making decisions to hire individuals that may not be a good fit because they feel like it's a tough, well, indeed, it's a tough market, right? And so it's hard to find those people. But what ends up happening is that they get on this bad cycle where they get kind of desperate and they compromise on the quality of individual that they're looking for. They're compromising on those standards. What happens is they end up attracting or getting people in that maybe aren't the best fit. And unfortunately, that only alienates then the good people that are there.
Yes.
So I see that a lot happening right now in this environment. And then once you get yourself in that bad cycle, it's very difficult to dig yourself out of it. So so that's one of the first things I talk about, that I would say here is that hold firm on your standards. Now make sure that you do have a really good understanding of what those qualities are. And I'm not talking about just years of experience and certifications, but I'm talking about competencies and the types of soft skills that an individual needs to have in order to be successful. The other thing too is that I think, like I said, that once that person is on board, everybody needs to certainly have a great onboarding and training, guidance from their supervisor. But like I said earlier, more than ever, that younger workforce really, they expect it. I mean, they need to, they just left school and now they're at their next place where they expect to be trained. And I think now more than ever, our hiring managers need to be strong coaches and trainers than ever before. They, in the past, like you said, of our generation, like you said, we were just thrilled to get a job, and we would do, we would do whatever was asked of us.
I did what I was told.
Exactly. I mean, it was, of course, that's how it works, right? And now, a different generation expects more discussion, more collaboration. They want to be able to provide their ideas, and they want to be heard, and that's not a bad thing. I mean, that is a great thing for our organizations. It provides a much more diverse and inclusive experience, which just breeds more creativity and more innovation. So those are all good things, but it just means that if our hiring managers, are from a different generation, we just really need to think of ourselves differently now. And again, one of the things that becomes really important is that our hiring managers need to get special training. They need to learn how to be coaches. There are certain, ways and techniques that are more effective than others. And so, even if they've been doing it all, they've been a hiring manager all of their lives, they might need to think a little bit differently about how they actually do their job in that role.
Yeah, because it's interesting. I always find through my work is that, that there's no manager. If I say to them, do you believe in coaching? And everyone's going to say, of course I do. Yes, I do. And so, well, how much time do you spend doing it? And then it's not quite right. And very often, actually, the issue is, do you know what? I don't really know how to have a coaching conversation.
Right.
It's not that it's that complex, right?
Right.
but you just need to understand it because it's different to kind of an operational management conversation. And you
Exactly.
just need to know how to do it. And I think that very often is the gap, that is actually just give me a process, give me a structure. I'll embrace that, and then I would do it. I would agree with it. But we talked about recruitment, but the other side of that is the retention.
Yeah.
So what is it that keeps somebody in an organization from your experience?
Yeah. Well, for, just very simply, although it's not simple to do, is, great communication. And then I think and I can talk more about what that means, but I think also really delivering on whatever you promised them during the recruiting process, right? I mean, I think we do, unfortunately, again, we do a lot of that. Again, I see it on the client acquisition side as well as on the employee acquisition, effort, is that a lot of companies don't really do a great job of walking the talk. And so if you promise a new employee that that they're going to be coached, or that they're going to, to experience a certain kind of environment, and if it's not that, then they have too many choices. They're going to go someplace else. You're not going to be able to keep them on board. And then I think the other thing is career paths. And more than ever, somebody wants to feel like I can continue to contribute more and more and have a greater and greater impact. And the more that you can allow them to do that in your own organization, so that they don't have to go elsewhere to get that, the better. So even if it's, even if you have a pretty, flat organization with, 2 different roles, let's look for opportunities within those roles to give someone more responsibility, to give them more opportunity to impact the organization and beyond. So, and then, like I said about communication, that's just, I'm always surprised at how organizations don't do a great job of understanding how we convey information, how we collect information, how do we hear from other people, how do we get, there are so many techniques. And again, like you said about the coaching, it's not hard. You just have to give organizations some structure and some techniques for getting that two-way communication going, because that's so much gets lost in translation.
Absolutely. And I've worked in, I don't know, many hundreds, thousands of organizations, and I don't think I've had one where they said, you know what, we're brilliant at communicating, right? I don't think I one.
Right. And it's causes so many problems.
Yeah, it does. Can I ask you, because Kim, you worked for a period of time in South Africa with wildlife conservation organizations, which I'd be interested to hear exactly what that was. Yeah. But I'm just curious as to what sort of work that was, but also, how different is that? Was that from kind of your more corporate experience in more recent times? And what did you take from that and bring it back into the world you operate in now?
Yeah, I'll give you, I know, we want to keep this short, so I won't.
I know, talk about, no, fine. No, this is great.
Okay. All right, because it is a kind of an unusual career path of mine that brought me to that, and then what I learned. So when I had been with a large corporation called Limited Brands that is very at the time in particular was very well known in the retail world for being a specialty brand, building a big family of specialty brand stores throughout the US and internationally as well. Victoria's Secret, it was one of those many brands that this organization had built. And so I had a lot of roles there. I was in the field as a sales manager for many years in my career there. ultimately came to our home office to be our director of HR, and then also ended up heading up a new function in the business at that time, which was a store operations function. So I got to wear a lot of hats in this organization. I was there for 15 years, had done a lot of things, had made loads of, had won awards, had some really significant accomplishments, even within that organization, had a very unusual career path. It gave me, I constantly wanted to be able to contribute. And so how could I do that? And so every couple of years I'd raise my hand and say, what can I do next? And fortunately, I was in an environment where they said, okay, here, try this. And so I got to do a lot of things, have a very broad experience all the way from field sales management, store by store, region, district, in the field, all the way to that corporate environment. And so had a really rewarding career there. And about, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 years before I left the organization, I had gone on a trip to Southern Africa, to Zimbabwe, actually, for my 10th wedding anniversary with my husband, on a walking safari. And we were immersed in the Zimbabwe bush for 3 weeks. Literally, I mean, just, staying in tents and, traveling on foot and, really being among the wildlife. And so, up to that point, I mean, I'm kind of an outdoorsy person. And so I've always, been somewhat comfortable in that kind of environment. But, this was a whole new level, walking among elephants and lions and giraffe and I mean, you name it, right? So was really this life-changing experience. And when I came back, I thought, I would love to be able to be a part of that somehow. How could I impact others in that way? How could I help provide those types of experiences for other people? And so I started noodling on that. And meanwhile, kind of just got immersed back into my regular job. Once you come back from vacation, get right back at it. So it was this, I kind of had this kind of back and forth struggle. So I went back there several times. I'd had quite a lot of vacation that I could take anyway. So I would go back to Southern Africa, to other countries in Southern Africa, work with other types of with different types of conservation organizations to understand, okay, what is this wildlife thing going on here? How is it that humans and wildlife interact, and how do we coexist, and how do we save species? So I really learned, I was just a sponge for conservation and really wanted to, like I said, to have this greater impact. I was, in my day job back at Limited, I was, selling jeans and selling sweaters. And that was kind of the extent of the impact that I was having in the world. And yet I could go over here to this other place and see all of this magnificence and all of these people doing this really amazing work to preserve this magnificence and to allow others to be able to experience that. And so I wanted to be there. So I tried to quit several times, never, every time I tried to quit, they'd give me more money and another promotion. And it was very difficult. It took me several years to really make that leap. But eventually, I got to a point. It's September 11th was my point. 2001 was my thing, right? It was my time when I realized, okay, look, life's too short. If you're ever going to make any kind of change, this is the day. This is the sign to do it. So for me, that was the sign. And so I left my career, and everyone thought, are you crazy, right? I mean, you've been very successful. You're amazing. Why would you want to make a change like this? And at that time, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to spend time there. So I left my career, and then I started working with mostly boards that were based here in the US, work with them to be hired to go work over in those conservation organizations to do the same work that I have always done in my career, which is really organizational development, right? So I went, and started with one of my first projects, and spent 3 weeks in Namibia with a cheetah conservation organization, and helping them just build infrastructure. These are field-based organizations, that are run and operated by scientists and researchers, and they don't necessarily know a lot about organizational design and organizational structure and how to utilize your human capital as productively as possible. So that's what I worked with on that first project. I then went back and did subsequent projects for different organizations, working with their board members on long-range planning. Again, a lot of the work that I did was around human capital and how do we use our people more productively. But what I'll say is that what I learned, spending months at a time in those organizations, the things that I learned were well, first of all, I learned how to do a necropsy on a cheetah.
I'm sure that comes in handy in Ohio.
You never know, right? Right, and many other things like that. But what I learned organizationally is that, first of all, these are truly diverse organizations. These are people these are organizations that are comprised of staff members and of volunteers that literally come from across the globe. And so, again, thinking about things like communication, and how do people that are literally from different parts of the world, how do we get them? They speak different languages, for heaven's sake. So how do we get them communicating in a way and finding common ground? And it all goes back to that impact, right? Like, we're all here to have an impact. And yes, we have a lot of differences. We have a lot of political differences, economic differences. We're all from different backgrounds. How can we relate to each other and still find that, and that common ground is always found in impact. So that's one of the first things, one of the biggest, most important lessons that I learned in that environment. And then the other thing that I learned about is what resourcefulness and resilience really is. That, these were field-based organizations. So we were, miles or kilometers away from food, water, health care, you name it, right? And so we were really out there in very remote situations, and there would be times when we would have no water. The water, they call it a borehole, but it's a well that would run dry. And so, we'd have to, as an organization, figure out, okay, how are we going to get water, or food? We would have, some regular trips that would go into town to get supplies, but sometimes those supplies would run short, or the truck would break down and we wouldn't have a way to get to town. And so, resilience and resourcefulness.
I'd say that actually brings. How many years did you do that work in Africa?
Off and on for about 8 years.
Right. Okay. It's a magnificent continent, isn't it? It's absolutely. It is diverse. Doesn't even begin to describe it, but it is magnificent. Yes. Absolutely magnificent. Yeah. Can I ask you just something you touched on there, and that I was really interested in coming back to, because I think it also plays into what we're talking about before in terms of the attraction, retention. You talked about resilience, right? Yeah. And I'm sure that when you're out in these organizations in Africa, boy, did you see resilience. But when you bring that back into the corporate world that you're operating in now, how do you define resilience in individuals and in teams, and how important is it?
Yeah, well, nowadays it's more important, I think, than ever. Especially we've all been through some pretty significant events over the last couple of years now. But the way I think of it is, and would define it is being unflappable, being kind of a source of calm in the storm. If you can, and whether that's whether you find that down deep, whether you find that in terms of teamwork, or just in terms of behaviors in the organization, or in your role in the organization, that's really what it is. What I do believe is that I don't necessarily think people are born with it. I think that it's a result of having adversity and having come through adversity. And, we all have different perspectives about adversity. But kind of overcoming a problem, surviving a failure, when you come out on the other end, that gives you a level of confidence that the next time something like that comes around, you'll be better equipped to deal with it. And so whether that's in an individual or whether that's in an organization, we've seen a lot of organizations have to reinvent in order to survive this, this pandemic that we're all still experiencing. And so I find that adversity and organizations that embrace it and that embrace failure and that learn from failure and, kind of foster that kind of learning environment are those that tend to do much better. And because they tend to be more resilient and their people tend to be more resilient. There's more, if you tolerate failure in your organization and think of it as as a learning opportunity in order to grow and get better, as opposed to punishing people for doing something wrong or for a misstep, that is a completely different mindset that makes it okay, right? Okay to fail. And again, that, failure is adversity, but it's resilience if you come out the other end of it. It's the opposite of resilience, right? If you let it destroy you.
And it's taking the learning from it. And I think the organizations that, kind of have a tolerance for failure and can actually talk about it, and people can really talk about it, and that's where the learning is. But sometimes in organizations, you don't talk about it because that strangely creates a culture where you just don't have the conversations that you need to have, which fosters the opposite of resilience.
Exactly. And it goes back to that thing with communication. It also goes back to ego. I mean, I think when there is a need to, again, to preserve some sort of inauthentic, veneer about who we are as individuals or even who we are as an organization. Again, that's where we don't talk about failure. So going back to, earlier when I was talking about authenticity and really defining your culture authentically, that once you've done that, then it's much easier to talk about your failures because, hey, look, we're all human and we're all going to have them. And we just think, again, it shifts the perspective, all the way around. So
absolutely. Kim, this has been fantastic. I'm sorry I've taken up a lot more of your time than I said I would.
Thank you.
But this has been really great. But before we wrap up, two questions I ask everybody. One is a book, other than maybe one that you've written yourself, a book that has had an impact upon you. And what was the book and what was the impact?
Yeah, so it's a really old book. It's been around probably since the, 70s, I think. It's called Your Money or Your Life. And I read it when I was probably in my mid 20s, when I was just kind of starting out on my career. And it's not really a business book, but it's something that has stuck with me just in the way that I think about my time and my energy in the world. And I think in many ways it goes back to how I think about what I choose to invest in, because I am this limited resource. And that's what this book talks about. It talks about you as a limited resource and how do you spend that? And so it stuck with me. I read it, like I said, way back many decades ago.
And what's it called? Your Money? What's it called? Your Money?
Your Money or Your Life. And I apologize, I can't remember who.
Okay, Your Money or Your Life. Well, that's a new one for me, so I must kind of dig that out. That's interesting. Yes. And the second question, sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
The second question I ask everyone is rituals or habits. Do you have them? Happy to share them, and what do they do for you?
Yeah. So my Ritual. So I am, like I mentioned, I'm an outdoorsy type of person. I grew up in Washington State around mountains and water, and I have always found incredible energy and renewal from being in nature. And so, I've kind of structured my life in a way so that I can spend as much time, in nature as possible. But I've got at least 2 days a week. I make it absolutely sacred. I don't let anything else get in the way, as tempting as it might be. 2 days a week, I go hiking, and I go hike in the woods on trails. And then another thing that I do regularly when I'm feeling particularly stressed out, I don't care what the weather is, I don't care what's going on, is I'll go out, I'll just go outside, listen, and just do kind of a listening exercise. What am I hearing? What's going on out here in nature? And that it's a little meditation. It takes, maybe 5, maybe 10 minutes to just go sit there, breathe, and listen to what nature I'm hearing. And it's a perspective building exercise, because you go through your day thinking and feeling like what I'm doing right now and these 4 walls is the most important thing on the planet. And if I don't get this thing crossed off my list, the world is going to come to an end. And we really get ourselves in that space. And so having that break where you just literally physically move yourself into another environment, there's so much life and there's so many important things, and there is life and death really going on out there. And it just gives you that perspective on what really is happening, and whether this thing on my list is really truly life or death or not. So those are my rituals.
Kim, I love that. That's fantastic. I really do love that. We'll put everything in the show notes, but just people listening, where can they get in touch with you? What's the best way to connect with you?
Yeah, the best way is to go to our website, which is civilisconsulting.com. It's spelled CIVILIS consulting.com. And then you can find me on LinkedIn. I just search for Kim Troy on LinkedIn, and there you'll find me.
Great. Kim, thank you so much. It's been a real honor. It's been really enjoyable and very informative. And I really am grateful to you for giving us your time today.
Me too. Thank you so much.